It was the moment no one thought they'd live to see. In a quiet study inside Sandringham, King Charles III lifted his pen, paused, and whispered two final words. "It's over." With that stroke of ink, centuries of tradition shifted. The crown, once his lifelong destiny, passed into the hands of Prince William and Princess Catherine. No trumpets, no fanfare, just silence, power, and history being rewritten before dawn. Why did Charles surrender the throne he'd waited decades to inherit? What truth drove this decision that's now shaking Britain to its core? Tonight, we uncover the story behind that final signature. The day history changed forever. Just after midnight, Buckingham Palace released a statement that stunned the United Kingdom. It confirmed what many had whispered about for weeks. King Charles III had signed the constitutional transfer papers, marking the formal handover of royal authority to Prince William and Princess Catherine. The announcement was only a few sentences long, measured, cautious, yet breathtaking in implication. Within minutes, television networks broke into programming, and the phrase, "The crown has been passed," spread across every screen in London. Behind the calm wording lay a decision that ended one reign and quietly began another. Sources within the palace say the act, classified internally as Document 7A, was signed in Charles's own hand, witnessed by 3 senior officials, and sealed with the royal crest. For the first time in modern British history, a monarch had voluntarily stepped aside while still alive, not through abdication or scandal, but by choice. That alone made the event historic. Across Britain, church bells that had rung for coronations now tolled softly in acknowledgement of transition. In Windsor, crowds gathered before dawn, lighting candles beneath the gates, as if mourning and celebrating at once. Newspapers printed just 2 words across their front pages: "It's over." Yet amid the awe and confusion, one question echoed in homes, cafes, and corridors of power alike: why now? The question spread like wildfire. In pubs, on trains, and through endless radio discussions, everyone wanted to understand what had driven King Charles to surrender the throne he had waited a lifetime to inherit. Whispers pointed to frailty, others to faith, and still others to quiet pressure from within the palace itself. Behind the gilded doors of Clarence House, the truth was darker, simpler, and far more human. The monarch had reached his breaking point. The king's health and the breaking point. Palace insiders confirmed that the king's health had been fragile for several months. His public appearances grew rarer. His last major engagement was a state dinner that ended early when he appeared visibly pale. Observers noted his shortened speeches, trembling hands, and the faint hesitation before rising to address Parliament. Even routine audiences, normally held twice each week, were reduced to short, private briefings with the Prime Minister and Lord Chamberlain. In private, Charles confided to those closest to him, "I cannot serve the crown if I cannot stand before the people." His physicians at St. Mary's Hospital advised total rest after detecting strain from decades of relentless duty. Behind palace walls, the mood shifted from concern to crisis. One aide described the moment succinctly. "We all realized the king was preparing to let go." The breaking point reportedly came after a lengthy consultation lasting nearly 3 hours between the king, Princess Anne, and the Archbishop of Canterbury. There, Charles admitted that continuing would mean ruling in name only, something he had always sworn never to do. His words were simple, his tone exhausted. "The crown is eternal. The body that carries it is not. Within days, legal officers began drafting what would become the most consequential signature of his life. By the end of that week, medical briefings concluded he would need indefinite withdrawal from state duties. No cameras recorded the moment he made his choice, yet insiders recall the silence that followed. Not defeat, but release. The monarch, who had carried the weight of history for over 5 decades, had finally allowed himself to rest. When the decision was made, only a handful of people knew. Among them, Princess Anne, the Archbishop, and a circle of senior advisors bound by oath. But one step remained before history could move forward: a formal council to record the king's will. And so, under guarded travel and heavy rain, motorcades departed for Balmoral Castle, the ancient retreat where royal decisions of destiny are often sealed. The private council at Balmoral. Inside Balmoral Castle, the air was thick with quiet tension. The same halls that once echoed with Queen Elizabeth II's laughter now hosted the most serious gathering of her son's reign. The Privy Council had been called without public notice, its members summoned by secure telephone lines and handwritten letters bearing the royal cipher. Within 4 hours, every key figure had arrived: ministers, clergy, and Princess Anne, whose expression alone spoke of solemn duty. At precisely 10:47 a.m., the king entered the drawing room, leaning lightly on his cane. No photographers were present, no reporters nearby. A clerk read aloud the declaration titled, "Instrument of Intent." In a voice both calm and heavy, Charles confirmed his wish to transfer sovereign responsibilities to Prince William and Princess Catherine. He paused after every sentence, aware that each word would echo through centuries of constitutional tradition. Witnesses later described the scene as reverent rather than tragic. The Archbishop of Canterbury offered a brief prayer. Princess Anne signed as the first witness, her signature firm and steady. One advisor said afterward, "It wasn't sorrow, it was history taking shape before our eyes." The parchment was folded, sealed with red wax, and locked within the Balmoral strong room, awaiting the king's final approval the next morning. Outside, the Scottish rain fell steadily across the moors, blurring the castle's silhouette. Those who stood guard would later say they felt something intangible in the air, a sense that the reign of one sovereign had quietly ended, and the next chapter of the monarchy had already begun. By nightfall, black cars departed the Balmoral gates under discreet police escort, carrying with them the sealed document that would change everything. Destination: Buckingham Palace. Awaiting its arrival were Prince William and Princess Catherine, summoned under a cloak of secrecy. They had no idea that within 48 hours, their lives and the life of the crown itself would never be the same again. William and Catherine's summons to the palace. 2 days after the Balmoral meeting, a black Range Rover pulled quietly into the courtyard of Buckingham Palace under cover of early morning fog. Inside were Prince William and Princess Catherine, summoned in secrecy by the Lord Chamberlain himself. There were no cameras, no royal flags flying, only silence. The pair entered through the East Wing entrance, escorted past corridors lined with portraits of former monarchs who had all ascended through duty, not choice. Yet, this time was different. This was a transition born of love and necessity. They were taken to the Privy Chamber, where a single red folder waited on the table. On its cover, embossed in gold, were the words, "Operation Continuum." The Lord Chamberlain, flanked by 2 legal advisors, explained in low, deliberate tones, These are the papers His Majesty intends to sign within 48 hours. They will transfer all sovereign duties to the Prince and Princess of Wales. Catherine's eyes widened. William's jaw tightened. This was no rehearsal for the future. This was the moment it had arrived unannounced. The folder contained 3 sections, each requiring King Charles's signature and the seal of the Privy Council. One addressed constitutional authority, another ceremonial rights, and the final, handwritten page marked personal will of sovereign intention, bore a line for Charles's initials. Catherine reportedly grew emotional, realizing the document symbolized the full passing of royal power. As she read the king's phrasing, "The crown must breathe anew in the next generation," she whispered to William. "He's ready to let go." That night, back at Adelaide Cottage, neither of them slept. William paced the floor, hands folded behind his back, replaying his father's words from earlier weeks. "Duty will come when you least wish for it, but when it comes, you must not refuse." In his private journal, he wrote just one sentence: "I never wanted the crown this way, but duty has arrived." It was the entry of a man stepping from son to sovereign in a single breath. As dawn broke over London, couriers were already en route from Sandringham, carrying the final drafts of the instrument of royal transfer. Within the next 24 hours, the king's study would host a meeting unlike any other in the history of the British monarchy. A single pen stroke would decide the future, not just for William and Catherine, but for the stability of the entire realm. The final signature. Inside Sandringham House, the morning light cut through the tall windows, spilling across the king's desk where 2 ink bottles and a fountain pen lay waiting. At precisely 9:15 a.m., King Charles III entered, accompanied by Princess Anne, Archbishop Justin Welby, and the Prime Minister. The instrument of royal transfer, printed on cream parchment, bore the royal seal and 3 empty signature lines. For a moment, no one spoke. The air itself felt suspended between past and future. Charles sat down slowly, his hand trembling as he reached for the pen. For 52 years, since his investiture as Prince of Wales in 1969, he had carried the shadow of the crown. Now, with a calm but resolute voice, he read aloud, "I, Charles, by the grace of God, do hereby delegate and transfer all sovereign duties and privileges to my heir, Prince William, and to his consort, Princess Catherine, in trust for the people of this realm." Then, quietly, he signed. The sound of pen on parchment was the softest whisper. Yet it was the sound of history itself. When he set the pen down, Charles exhaled deeply, his eyes glistening. He looked to Anne, then to the Archbishop, and whispered, "It's over. The crown is theirs now." Witnesses say Anne placed her hand on his shoulder in silent respect. The document was folded and sealed in red wax, bearing the imprint of the royal crest of St. Edward, the same design used in coronations since the 17th century. Once the act was completed, the Prime Minister stood, bowed, and said softly, "Your Majesty, this signature will be remembered as one of service, not surrender." Charles nodded, replying, "Let the people see renewal, not loss." The parchment was immediately locked in a black case labeled Actum Regium, transferred to the royal archives under armed guard, and registered in the court circular within the hour. By midday, Britain had entered a new chapter. The weight of that signature rippled through every corridor of Buckingham Palace. Courtiers whispered, aides hurried, and a quiet sadness filled the air. But for Charles, there was peace. For William and Catherine, destiny. Before the news reached the public, one final moment was needed. A farewell not of politics, but of family. And behind closed doors, it would become the most emotional meeting of their lives. What the transfer really means. This was not an abdication. It was something far more nuanced, a constitutional innovation unseen in centuries. The signed document established what scholars now call the transfer of sovereign duties, a rare form of living regency. It allowed the king to remain His Majesty in title, but handed all executive powers and ceremonial responsibilities to Prince William. For Britain, it ensured continuity. For Charles, it granted peace. For the monarchy, it was a masterstroke of survival. Under the new arrangement, Prince William would represent the crown at all state functions, military briefings, and national addresses. Princess Catherine, named in the act as co-sovereign in representation, became the first royal consort in modern history to hold joint authority prior to coronation. Every major document, from cabinet approvals to Commonwealth communiques, would now bear her countersignature. This shift quietly reshaped centuries of royal tradition, merging stability with the compassion that Catherine had become known for. The king, though retaining the honor of his title, withdrew entirely from governance. His daily schedule, once filled with official duties, now revolved around private correspondence, personal charity work, and the gardens of Highgrove. The official explanation released by the palace emphasized renewal through responsible transition, a phrase that resonated across the Commonwealth. The transfer had not diminished the crown. It had modernized it. Within diplomatic circles, the move was hailed as visionary. International observers from Canada, Australia, and New Zealand noted that the act could set precedent for constitutional monarchies worldwide. Scholars at Oxford University called it a peaceful evolution of monarchy suited to the 21st century. Yet for the public, the symbolism mattered more than the law. Britain had watched a father's love for his son reshape an empire's destiny. And so, with the ink barely dry and the crown's weight shifting to new shoulders, the stage was set for a farewell unlike any before. Behind the gilded doors of Buckingham Palace, Charles awaited his son and daughter-in-law one last time, not as their sovereign, but as their father. The meeting that followed would close one reign and begin another, with words that would echo through royal history. The emotional farewell inside the palace. When William and Catherine arrived at Buckingham Palace, the halls were hushed, the marble floors reflecting the glow of late afternoon light. Courtiers stood still as the couple made their way toward the king's private study. Waiting there was Charles, no longer surrounded by advisors or aides, only by family. He wore a simple gray suit, the same he had worn during Queen Elizabeth II's final Christmas broadcast. This was not a moment for ceremony. It was a farewell between blood and legacy. The king rose slowly from his chair as William entered. For a brief second, there were no titles, no ranks, just father and son. "I've done my part," Charles said quietly, his voice heavy but steady. "Now lead them into the future." Catherine, visibly emotional, stepped forward, her eyes glistening. She knelt briefly, as tradition dictated, and whispered, "We'll honor your legacy, and your mother's." It was a gesture that joined two generations of monarchy in one act of love. For several minutes, no one spoke. Princess Anne stood by the window, tears forming as she watched the family embrace. The clock on the mantelpiece struck 6, echoing through the quiet chamber. William placed his hand over his father's and said simply, "Thank you for trusting us, Father." Charles smiled faintly. Trust was never the issue. It was always time outside. The evening light faded over the mall, while inside, the reign of one sovereign was ending in silence, replaced by the quiet breath of another beginning. When they left, Catherine glanced back toward the closed study doors. She later told a close friend, "That was the moment I truly understood the weight of the crown, not as power, but as sacrifice." From that room, history had shifted again, not through force or ceremony, but through humanity. Within hours of the farewell, palace officials began preparing for a public announcement unlike any since Queen Elizabeth II's passing. Cameramen were summoned, curtains drawn, and a statement was recorded under strict secrecy. The next morning, Britain would awaken to a monarch's voice speaking his final words to the nation, words not of resignation, but of renewal. The public revelation. At 9 a.m., every British network interrupted programming. The royal crest appeared on screen, followed by a simple message, a statement from His Majesty the King. Then Charles III appeared seated beside Princess Anne, his posture straight, but his expression serene. Behind him hung the flags of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. The broadcast lasted 9 minutes, yet it was long enough to mark the end of an era. "My dear people," he began softly, "the time has come for renewal. My son William and his wife Catherine will now carry the responsibilities I once held." There was no regret, only quiet pride. He spoke of duty, love, and gratitude, thanking Queen Elizabeth, his ancestors, and the people who have allowed this crown to endure through centuries of change. The closing words lingered. "I remain your servant, though no longer your sovereign." Across Britain, emotion swept through the public. In London, commuters paused at stations, wiping tears as they watched on their phones. In Edinburgh and Cardiff, church bells rang in tribute. Crowds began gathering outside Buckingham Palace, waving small Union flags in spontaneous respect. For the first time since the Platinum Jubilee, the monarchy felt unified, steady, and deeply human. Internationally, the message reverberated. Leaders from Canada, Australia, India, and New Zealand issued statements of admiration. The New York Times headline read, "A monarch steps aside gracefully." For millions, this was not an ending. It was a passing of the torch from one generation to another, lit not by politics, but by legacy. With the king's message echoing across the world, the focus turned to Catherine. The public awaited her first words, not as the Duchess, but as the woman stepping into the world's most symbolic role. When she finally spoke, it was from a podium adorned with a single lily, the flower Queen Elizabeth II had favored. And from her first sentence, the new era of monarchy found its voice. Catherine's rise as modern monarch. Standing before the nation, Catherine, Princess of Wales, delivered her address with a calm authority that silenced the room. Dressed in a deep sapphire coat, the same shade as her engagement ring, she began, "We inherit not the throne alone, but the duty to serve." Those words, only 9 in total, carried the weight of centuries. She thanked King Charles for his wisdom and grace, calling him the steady bridge between legacy and tomorrow. Her speech lasted 10 minutes, blending dignity with emotion. She pledged to prioritize youth empowerment, mental health, and education reform, issues she had championed since her earliest public work. "Ours is not a rule of authority," she said, "but of service. Our future lies in unity, compassion, and courage." The tone was unmistakably modern, regal, yet reachable. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace as her image was broadcast live across the Commonwealth. Thousands chanted, "Long live William and Catherine." From Manchester to Melbourne, people described her words as a renewal of faith in leadership. The global press praised her sincerity. Even critics of the monarchy called her message a masterclass in humility and strength. Later that evening, the palace balcony filled once more. William stood beside her, their 3 children waving shyly to the cheering crowd. The symbolism was complete, a family at the heart of a modern monarchy. As the national anthem played, cameras caught Catherine whispering to William, "This is just the beginning." By nightfall, commentators had begun calling it the Windsor Renewal. What had begun as crisis was now rebirth. The papers were signed, the speeches made, yet one final chapter remained. In the quiet hours after the crowd dispersed, King Charles retreated to Sandringham, while William and Catherine prepared for the duties ahead. Britain stood still, waiting for what would come next, the official birth of a new royal era. The dawn of the Windsor Renewal. Historians are already calling it the peaceful transition. For the first time in British history, a living monarch had formally transferred the crown without conflict or abdication. The act, now housed in the royal archives, is viewed by scholars as the blueprint for a modern constitutional monarchy. King Charles retired quietly to Sandringham House, dedicating his remaining years to environmental work and philanthropy. His new title, King Emeritus, symbolized not loss, but legacy. Meanwhile, William and Catherine began assuming full royal duties. Plans were confirmed for an official joint coronation at Westminster Abbey, an unprecedented ceremony reflecting shared service rather than hierarchy. Prime ministerial briefings, Commonwealth meetings, and charity patronages were immediately reassigned under their stewardship. The royal household itself underwent restructuring, slimmer, more efficient, echoing the couple's promise to modernize the crown for the 21st century. Public sentiment soared. Polls showed record support, with 82% of respondents expressing faith in the new royal leadership. Across Britain, schools held assemblies celebrating the new age of Windsor. The phrase, "With Catherine we trust," began trending worldwide. In Parliament, even long-standing Republicans admitted admiration for the king's dignity and the princess's composure. As dusk settled over London, the palace balcony lights glowed once more. William, Catherine, George, Charlotte, and Louis stood hand in hand. The future, visible and alive. And somewhere far away in Sandringham, King Charles watched the broadcast quietly, smiling. The ink of his signature had faded on parchment, but its meaning would never fade from history. One reign had ended. Another had begun. Not through coronation or decree, but through courage, love, and renewal. And so, with one signature, a reign ended not in scandal, but in grace. King Charles retreated to Sandringham as William and Catherine stepped forward, young yet resolute, carrying the crown into a new age. Across Britain, church bells rang and crowds whispered, "A new dawn for the Windsors." History will remember this as the moment duty overcame tradition. Love outweighed power, and the monarchy itself learned to evolve. One chapter closes, another begins, and the story of Britain's future now rests in the hands of William and Catherine. The crown endures, renewed by the courage to let go.